everybody. Welcome to the Energy News Beat podcast. My name's Turley, President and CEO of the Sandstone Group. We're just one day away from Thanksgiving, or really shutting down for Thanksgiving. We've got a fantastic guest today, but my co-host today is David Blackmon. He is the podcast host over there at the Energy Impacts and the Energy Absurdities Substack. Mr. Blackmon, how the hey are you?
Oh, gosh, I'm just so happy I can hardly stand to be around myself.
Oh, you and Eeyore. Hey, but let's go to our wonderful guest, not just a Doomberg, the almighty Doomberg. How are you, sir?
Stu, David, great to be with you, and a preemptive happy Thanksgiving to you and your families. And I hope that you have a fantastic meal that I am anticipating that I will be indulging upon on Thursday, but looking forward to another great discussion with you guys.
Well, I'm hoping that nobody misidentifies you as a turkey, because you are
There are no green turkeys.
Don't worry, my security situation is quite robust.
All of our listeners, our great and wonderful listeners, know who you are, and we absolutely love that. But go to Doomberg.com and register and follow for fantastic articles. We've got really three major topics for today, guys, that we really want to try to go over and copy and talk about. And Mr. Doomberg, I'll tell you what, you've got a fantastic story when you wrote the late Britain. Tell us what you were thinking about there.
Yeah, this is timely because this story that we chronicled, I guess it was on the 12th of November, a couple of weeks ago, is coming to a head tomorrow, actually. We're recording this or live streaming this today on Tuesday. Rachel Reeves, who's sort of the finance minister of Britain, the chancellor, she's announcing her fall budget tomorrow. And that's actually a pretty decisive moment in British politics. And you may recall Liz Truss, former prime minister. She, lost the race with the head of lettuce because of a budgetary proposal that fell flat with the markets. And there's a fair to midland chance that we could see similar disruptions, shall we say, in the market for British debt on a go-forward basis, depending on what Rachel Reeves proposes. Our interest, of course, is in this crazy windfall profits tax on oil and gas companies operating predominantly in the North Sea. Mm. This is suffocating British oil and gas production. For those that aren't aware, companies operating in the North Sea are paying a 78% marginal tax rate on their profits, and surprise, the level of investment in the North Sea is plummeting. We opened this piece with the story of yet another oil refinery closing in the United Kingdom. The Californication of British energy regulatory policy is well underway. And one of the things that we pointed out is that when you have suffocating regulatory and tax regimes like this, the existing super majors tend to sell their strategic assets to, sure, let's just call them lower quality owners. And maybe these owners don't invest the same amount into maintenance and growth because they're kind of trying to squeeze cash out. Think private equity, think energy companies without, say, the same track record of experience or frankly as much to lose as an ExxonMobil or a BP or a Shell. And Britain is going through that phase of its oil and gas journey right now. And so depending on how Rachel Reeves treats that excess profits tax, which of course is just absurd, we think that the near-term future of Great Britain will be largely set based on what happens in the next couple of days in that country. And so we thought it was worth pointing out a couple of weeks in advance. We like to be ahead of the news, as you know. And so that was the main point of Late Britain.
Well, you were way ahead of the news on that one. That was, you published that 2 weeks ago. And since that, I've noticed that we've had a spate of stories, a lot of coverage about that pending budget since then. So you were at the tip of the spear on that for sure. The problem, of course, Britain has, and you talk about this in that piece, is that they're likely stuck with the Labour Party regardless. of what happens and the fallout to this budget until, what is it, August of 2029, I think?
2029 for sure. And I probably could take an opportunity to explain this because British politics is similar to other sort of parliamentary systems in the Commonwealth. Britain runs what's known as a first past the post primary electoral system, which is actually quite similar to how U.S. elects its Congress, both the House and the Senate, but except one important distinction is that in the U.S. there's really only two parties. And in countries like Canada or the United Kingdom, there tends to be multiple parties. And in a first, more than 2, 3, 4, 5 meaningful parties that get a share of the vote. In a first past the post electoral system, what you find is that you can win a seat with 30, 35, 40% of the vote, never have to actually achieve a majority. And what happened in the last election is that conservatives became unpopular. It wasn't really an alternative. And Labour, which is basically a uniparty to the conservatives, won a fairly substantial majority with only like 33, 34% of the vote.
Right.
And in that piece, we quoted, Marine Le Pen in France. Her party got 32% of the vote, and she only got the third most seats, and now she's under house arrest. And so it goes to show you a very thin string that held up the Labour Party in the first place. So the media always likes to talk about the Labour Party landslide. That's a landslide number of seats, not in number of votes. So they got a very small plurality of the vote. They got a huge supermajority, basically, of the number of seats. And because they're elected for 5-year terms, there's no motivation for the Labour Party at all to call an election because they would get wiped out today. In fact, if there was an election today, Nigel Farage, whatever you think of him, his party would probably win 75, 80% of the seats because those first past the post systems in, where you have 3 major parties, 4 major parties, they can really get distorted results. And in France, in particular, between the first and the second round of their last, elections for the Assemblée Nationale, Macron conspired with left-leaning parties to selectively pull candidates out to make sure that Le Pen's party got the least amount of seats possible. So even though she won the popular vote, she only got the 3rd highest number of seats. And as I mentioned, she's now under house arrest for having been convicted of a crime that apparently practically every European politician does. But in the modern age, every prosecution is selective prosecution. So you have this situation in Britain where a wildly unpopular prime minister, quantifiably the least popular prime minister in the history of the country, they're kind of stuck with him. And even if they manage to do an internal Labour Party coup, the person you're likely to get to fill his place, which is how we close the piece, is none other than anti-energy net zero zealot Ed Miliband. And the cure to what ails Great Britain, of course, smiling in their tuxes in Brazil while London burns. The cure to what ails Britain is a energy first, Chris Wright, Donald Trump type policy,
right,
where investment in oil and gas is encouraged, where British energy supply risk is minimized, and energy abundance leads to a resuscitation of Britain's once proud heavy industry, which is in a death spiral. And that's not even on anybody's radar right now. And so when we look at the political ability to do what is needed to save Britain, it doesn't exist. And so logically, one wonders whether the next global financial crisis might not arise in London. So it's even though you might think, what do I care about the fall budget and who is this Rachel Reeves and what is this red bag that she's holding? There's a world where that domino tips over a lot of other dominoes.
Yes.
And ultimately affects you and me. And so that's why we decided to write about it.
Well, you bring up a fantastic story because the Bank of London is its own, and you take a look at the City of London, it's its own area there. The Bank of London is its own independent of the country, and it is approaching bankruptcy. And they've been fighting for the war in Ukraine. And I think we're approaching the end of the war in Ukraine. There's rumblings that there may be making breakthroughs on that.
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical of those headlines. I think you mean the Bank of England. I'm not
Yes.
sure that there's a Bank of London. Maybe there is. I don't know. I think that the only way the war in Ukraine ends is at the end of a barrel. We've studied this. We've seen this theater play out multiple times. Here's how it happens. Putin and Trump have a meeting. They agree broadly on terms. Trump's a pretty agreeable guy.
Yeah.
And he's also pretty malleable to whoever he's talking with. So Trump and Putin come to an agreement that is not necessarily acceptable to Russia, but Putin would say that we can work with this document. This is a foundation from which we can negotiate. Right. Then the Europeans and the Ukrainians are in a state of shock, panic, anger, uproar, and they get to Trump and they pull him away from that agreement, which was already probably not acceptable to the Russians, but close enough to talk. And then they convince Trump that they should go in this other direction. And he agrees because he's very agreeable. And then the Russians were like, well, yeah, we're not going to do that. So we'll just see on the battlefield. And I think we're at that final stage of this current peace negotiation cycle right now. That's our view. We just put up, by the way, for our Doom Zoom Pro tier this morning, our November Doom Zoom called World War III, How We Got Here and Where We're Going. And we go into this in a fair bit of detail during that 50-minute long presentation for our premium subscribers.
Yeah, I know the Russian foreign minister this morning, in fact, said that the agreement that Ukraine basically has agreed to now is unacceptable to Russia, and it's a non-starter. So
I believe what he said was it is so different than what was agreed upon in Anchorage as to be a non-starter. Because to be fair to the Russians, Putin left Anchorage thinking he had cut a deal with Trump.
Yes.
If you listen to the Russians telling of it. And Trump's posts thereafter. But then what happened immediately? He's in the White House with the Europeans and Zelensky, and all of a sudden he's issuing sanctions on, on Lukoil and so on. And so this war was always going to end on, like, as we said in the presentation today, this is basically a civil war in Ukraine. And we started that presentation with a picture of the 2010 election in Ukraine, which is not, Russian talking points. It's literally actual data that the Ukrainian government has published that you can go find on Wikipedia. And if you just look at, there were two candidates in the race. One was pro-Russian, one was pro-Europe. And the pro-European candidate got 90% of the vote in the western part of Ukraine, and the pro-Russian candidate got 90% of the vote in the, 70 to 90% of the vote in the eastern part of Ukraine. And when you look at that map that we showed in this presentation, it's quite clear that this is kind of like, look, I mean, yeah, well, there you go. Yeah, that's not the map that we showed, but that is a map that captures it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was bringing this one up, Almighty Doomberg, just to show people kind of don't understand that Ukraine was not always Ukraine.
Sure.
Americans don't understand anything outside their own state border.
Well, my favorite thing is to hear Ursula von der Leyen say that borders can never be changed by force. Find me a border in the world that wasn't established by force.
Europe is the primest example of that.
Of course. I mean, please, let's go through the history of what the border of Germany was and how did those changes come. Anyway, don't want to get into these details. You're going to trigger a bunch of angry comments if we go too far down this rabbit hole. But
we do that all the time. Yeah.
But suffice to say, our view is that Trump is always quite optimistic about just how close peace is. And to give Trump credit, at least he's trying. Like, I give him full credit for that. But this is a civil war that will end in the same way that the U.S. Civil War did, through a military capitulation at some point.
As in my opinion, I believe Zelensky was installed. I think he's going to have to be not there in order to end the war. And however that happens is going to be needs to be a election.
So to be fair to Zelensky, he did win an election. He may have been installed as a candidate, but he is no longer the elected president of Ukraine, although he's the acting president because of martial law, which is something else we can get into. But he did win a Democratic race, and there's no credible evidence that race was manipulated with. And he actually, ironically, ran on a campaign to make peace with Russia. which I think is why he won enough votes in the pro-Russian part of Ukraine, because he was viewed as a candidate who would implement the Minsk agreements, for example. Now, what he's done since is a whole different matter. But I do agree with the second half of your assessment, which is there can be no negotiated peace with him there. That's, and whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing it's not really relevant. It's just, this is why whenever I see this hype cycle around peace agreements, I kind of roll my eyes because, by the way, overnight, Russia launched one of its biggest drone and missile strikes against Ukraine, and Ukraine launched a pretty sizable drone and missile strike against Russia. There's nothing about these two parties and the way in which they're behaving on the battlefield that indicates they're near peace.
No.
And so there's a lot of pressure Trump's putting on. The U.S. is still a very powerful country. But look, Trump could end the war tomorrow if he stopped providing intelligence to the Ukrainians. The war would end very quickly, but then Trump would be blamed for it.
Sure.
So the first 4 years of what happened would be, condemned to the, to the memory hole of history, and the entire subsequent loss that Ukraine would undoubtedly suffer in the absence of U.S. military support and intelligence support would be blamed solely on Trump, which one wonders might be perhaps what's really going on here with the neocon wing in Washington and the European leaders. Because it's very clear, having studied the war on a daily basis for more than 2 years, with the various mapping projects, Ukrainian mapping projects, Russian mapping projects that claim to be more neutral. The direction of travel is very clear, and grinding wars of attrition are won by the bigger country with the bigger economy, with the bigger energy, and the bigger manufacturing base. And between these two countries, it's very clear who that is. So that's where we are.
I wonder what you make. I saw a report, I think it was yesterday morning. The days kind of run together for me these days. That Russia's year-over-year oil revenues were down 35%.
Sure.
Isn't that cutting into Russia's ability to continue to fund this war in the way it has been financed for the last 3.5 years?
Oil revenues, and we should say actually profits are more important than revenues, as you both know. They're a ever-shrinking input into the Russian economy. Are the attacks on the refineries hurting Russia? Sure. Are the sanctions hurting Russia? Sure. Are they definitive, or are they decisive, I guess is the word I was looking for? Absolutely not. Look, Russia's a net exporter of crude and refined products, right?
Yeah.
It has an internal military-industrial complex that is currently vastly outproducing NATO. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. The first thing Russia will do is turn off exports. And it will keep its precious hydrocarbons internally to feed its military-industrial complex. So when in this presentation, we go over this, Russia right now is committing what we have consistently called war crimes by systematically destroying the entire electricity and thermal water grids of Ukraine just into winter.
I believe they've gotten rid of 80% of Ukraine's thermal capacity.
And I don't know about the numbers, but thermal capacity is a very big deal heading into winter.
Yeah.
For those that aren't aware, the old Soviet system was sort of free heat for everybody, and all the apartments and homes were hooked up to these centralized thermal systems. And the human need to stay in thermal comfort accounts for 40%, for example, of U.S. carbon emissions, just to put this into perspective for people. If you don't have heat in the winter, you can't stay in the city. And Kiev looks like it might be unlivable this winter. And we call it a war crime because it disproportionately impacts the civilian life. Sure, it hurts the military, but it hurts civilians way more. The U.S. has done this, by the way. Again, one of the things we like to say is the phrase war crimes is oxymoronic. It's one of the reasons why we are staunchly anti-war. But the systematic destruction of Ukraine's electricity and thermal grids is going to have a far greater impact on Ukraine's ability to stay in the fight than Russia's, when you look at the impacts of Russia's refinery. And this is evidenced by the fact that the urgency to get a peace is is as high as it's ever been. Well, Russia's not urgently demanding a ceasefire or peace. Putin recently just said in a opening speech to his Security Council that his preference would be to fight it out militarily because he knows how that's going to end. But he's always willing to have a negotiated settlement, yada, yada. Now, people who are strongly anti-Putin or people who have never actually read anything that Russia has ever said might think, well, what are you doing even like reading that transcript? Well, I read everybody's propaganda, and it's always interesting to see what the other side is saying to itself. Because then you know that the counterproposal that Ukraine watered down the original 28-point peace plan is just never gonna land in Moscow. And if so, you know it's never gonna land in Moscow, then you could very quickly determine that, okay, this war is going to end at the end of a barrel. And that's currently our view. And so that's where we are. And again, we opened this Doom Zoom that we published this morning, and I only mentioned it a few times because it's top of mind because I've been answering comments and emails about it. By saying that the amount of propaganda is so thick. And if you're only reading Western propaganda, you have no idea what's going on. And I read Iranian propaganda, Israeli propaganda, Chinese propaganda, Russian propaganda, Ukrainian propaganda, British propaganda, European propaganda, Brazilian propaganda, American, Canadian, Mexican. And I can tell you, without hesitation, by far the worst is the British. And anytime we comment on this affair or write an article that references it, or even today publishing this pro talk on it, we always get a few very angry comments or emails from Britain.
Of course.
And my response to them is, these are our authentically held views, politely expressed. And if these anger you, that says more about you than it does about us. Which is about as nice a way as I can say it.
That's very kind, yes.
But anyway, I digress. But and I've said this on other shows. Maybe I even said it last time I was on with you guys. If you want to get a real personal, direct, visceral training on how to read the news,
right.
the next time you have a dominant news cycle event, I don't care what it is, assassination attempt of Donald Trump, or massive negotiations going on in the war, or the Israeli-Iran missile exchange, take a moment and read how 8 different countries describe what just occurred. And your mind will be blown.
Holy smokes.
And you will never be able to read the news in the same way again.
Doomberg, you're talking about my wife. I go in and I have to figure out which one of the 8 wives I have married that day. So, it's almost the same thing.
That sounds like a you problem.
That is, yeah, that's a you problem, Steve.
But no, it's a serious point. Like, if you've ever done that, like, I don't know, take the Lewinsky scandal, or pick your favorite. Like, anything that is currently dominating global news, and then, okay, just have a conversation with Perplexity and say, what is the largest English language Russian official news agency? What is the or that has an English translation? So it would be TASS. If I want to read the British stuff, I'll look at the Guardian, or I'll look at the Telegraph. And if I want to read the American, it'd be the Washington Post, or the New York Times, or Fox News, or New York Post. And you do that for 8 or 9 countries and just spend an hour. How does the China Times describe? Here's a perfect example: the meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping in Korea.
Right.
Go and read how the Russians described it, how the Chinese described it, how the Financial Times, which is British, described it, how it was described in Brazil, which is a proxy for the global south of Latin America, South and Central America, and then you just read all of these English language versions of these government outlets, basically, and you will find, to varying degrees, 8 wildly different interpretations of what just occurred.
How fun! I'm going to go try this on my wife. But hey, let's try this next thing here. Speaking of horrible wives, Gavin Newsom. This ties to Gavin Newsom with your other article. Doomberg, last week, we did notice that India shipped in a tanker full of jet fuel. I tracked it down, and that refinery had just bought a bunch of Russian oil.
Yeah.
So we have Gavin Newsom who has decimated the cotton picking entire oil industry. And now you have the main pipeline in California losing $2 million a month. And then you have him saying that it's starting in January, or I believe real soon. Oh, we've got 2,000 woohoo permits for Kern County. That's not enough oil to even keep that pipeline going. But I digress. Let's go over to your article on the Shasta, what you had here.
Yeah, Shasta La Vista, one of my favorite titles.
I'll be back.
Yeah, Shasta La Vista, and Gavin Newsom is a perennial, mild punching bag in our newsletter for a variety of reasons. But he is. Look, for all of whatever you might think of Gavin Newsom, I should lead this by saying that he is an incredibly talented politician, and he is a formidable retail politician. And because he is politician first, he doesn't have any really core principles, and he will shapeshift to wherever he needs to be to first secure the Democratic Party nomination and then win the general election. And I caution my more conservative-leaning friends that Donald Trump won the general election by, I think, 1.25 points, point and a third. And Gavin Newsom is way better than 1.5 points better than Kamala Harris. And so I think it would be wise for people to not underestimate Gavin Newsom as a political force and his potential future in the U.S., especially given the pliant legacy media outlets which will support him thoroughly. So with that background, there's an interesting little situation developing in California. Northern California is amongst the most conservative on the West Coast, and Shasta County in particular, I think, voted 2/3 for Trump. And because of this new Prop 50, they're losing their congressional seat in Washington. So they have been roped in. If you scroll down, I think you can see the new district. Yeah, there it is. So Shasta County's in pink, and you can see that this new district has been ropes in enough people from San Francisco, which couldn't be more different than Shasta County, so as to nullify their representation in the federal government. And at the same time, the state government in Sacramento is looking to override local opposition to a very large wind farm that has been rejected by county planners multiple times. And in fact, California made an entire new law because of this one project that allows Sacramento to overrule, technically the California Energy Commission, which is an arm of the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, aforementioned Gavin Newsom. And this project, that's a rendering of it. That's not the project, just to be clear. And I do agree with Patrick's comment, but I would I would advise against political violence as a
we don't do political violence. We find Patrick very very humorous.
Yes, I concur with the impulse, but impulse control is the sign of a civilized man. So this project has been appealed using this new law that passed after it was rejected. Basically, the law gives the California Energy Commission to tell the Shastas of the world that they're going to do it and they're going to like it. Even the staff on the CEC has now recommended against this project. One of the challenges with this project is that it actually makes fighting forest fires harder, because the planes that come in and dump the anti-flammable chemicals onto these fires would have challenging ability to do this. And Shasta has been the subject of a couple of historically really devastating forest fires in the past. The company that's involved with this, the developers, call that nonsense, of course, as one might expect. But I'm just laying out the political battleground as it exists. And so this project remains in purgatory, and how it resolves, we think, will be quite interesting. You have the pro-renewables crowd complaining. This is the locals who are objecting to it, of course. And then you have Gavin Newsom, who has eyes on the Oval Office, who probably doesn't want to necessarily go down this path too far. And so it's just a very fascinating situation. One of these off the beaten path stories that we like to publish on at Doomberg every once in a while.
I love this picture, by the way. We've got the Doomberg sitting on his shoulder.
No, looking over his shoulder. If we were sitting on it, then there
Keeping
might be
an eye on him. Yeah.
there might be a biological accident that would happen.
Yeah, thank you. I would hope you would leave your mark on his suit. But when we sit back and take a look at California, I absolutely just, when I wrote the stories on that last week, had a cow writing them, because it is absolutely abysmal what this man has done to the entire state of California. And he keeps saying, I run the 4th largest economy in the world. You've destroyed the 4th largest economy, and you've now created a national security risk, dude. But
yet somehow it remains the 4th largest economy, even after 8 years of this guy, or 7 years.
Yeah. Well, look, let's just say this again. None of that matters.
Yeah. No, on a national scale, it
it
really
does not
does.
matter
Still
at
have
all.
the media propagandizing.
I mean, we had, I'm going to probably annoy some people, but luckily nobody's listening. It's just 2 of us, 3 of us. But we had a cadaver as president for at least the last 2.5 years of Biden's presidency. Right. I mean, and
Twitter.
I mean, it was weekend at Bernie's. It was very clear that the man wasn't.
Isn't that a great movie?
Great movie. And by the way, even after the disastrous debate, my honest view is he probably would have polled better than Harris did.
He might have, yeah.
Yeah.
That's entirely possible.
Right. And so if that's your comp, I mean, Gavin Newsom is a talented politician capable of stringing together coherent paragraphs, let alone sentences. And he's a formidable candidate. And I would underestimate him. Well, I mean, I would advise people not to. And I would say this, of course, if Trump is not running, for whatever you think of J.D. Vance or whoever wins the nomination, they're not Trump. Trump was a generationally talented retail politician who convinced much of blue-collar America that he was their champion. You might think that's foolish of blue-collar America, or you might think that he is legitimately their champion. It doesn't matter. He had the retail talent. I could tell you. He gave a rally, one of his campaign rallies. And then I decided to go to it. It was in my area, within an hour's drive, and I just wanted to go. Let me soak up the vibes, And it was amazing. It's stunning. Like the number of guys who had decorated their pickup trucks in mega gear and driving around town with their mega flags, and everybody on the sidewalk in their mega. And it was like, wow. And I know this community. I've lived in and around it for a long time. And I was like, wow, okay. And whatever I think of Trump, my view on Trump is that he is everything all of his critics and supporters say he is. He's all of those things. He is the guy who did Trump University, and he's the guy who sealed the borders, and he's the guy who's pro-energy, and he's the guy who tweets things that make me cringe, and he's all of those things, right? But that means you can't deny the fact that he's an incredibly talented retail politician.
Sure.
And that his successor is unlikely to be as talented in that regard. And that whoever runs next time is going to be better than what ran the last 2 on the Democratic side, very likely. And so I think 2028 is going to be a formidable challenge for the more conservative-leaning listeners on your show.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt about that. I would just also say, though, that J.D. Vance is going to come. If he's the nominee, he doesn't have all of Trump's baggage either.
Sure.
And neither would Marco Rubio. I mean,
Sure.
these campaigns become their own unique animals.
Yeah.
And by and large, every presidential election is either a change election or a status quo election. And, whether 2028 is one or the other is going to depend entirely on what happens between now and then.
Sure. No, I agree with you. But then you're talking about, Mitt Romney versus Barack Obama. What's the big...
And that should have been a change election, right? I mean, by all intents and purposes, that should have been a change election because the public was fed up with Obama. but Romney was such a horrible candidate. And so that's the wild card. You could
Yeah.
end up with a horrible candidate who changes the complexion of the election due to their own incompetence.
It's funny you say that because he was certainly portrayed as such. I concur
Well,
with
he
that.
was. He was a terrible kid.
But he was also an extremely talented person. I mean, he
Oh,
built
very talented
a
person.
wildly
Yeah.
successful private equity
Yeah.
firm. You know, so anyway, not to get into too much
Anyway,
politics,
yeah, no,
but
I mean it's all so complex, and it's always fascinating to see how it shakes out. But I agree with your assessment of Newsom. He's certainly a far more talented retail politician than Kamala Harris.
It's pretty frightening. Hey, I've got two questions for you here. Let's the United States petrodollar. Want to get your opinion on this. Is the petrodollar dead or just wounded? And the petrodollar is tied to the U.S. dollar, and the amount of weaponization that has happened over the last several years has been absolutely crazy. And in this graph that I found is, you sit back and take a look at the amount of gold that's been buying around the world in the different currencies. Japan's currency is at 230% of their GDP. That's a heck of a GDP to debt ratio. And when you take a look at gold versus the U.S. standard, what are your thoughts on the U.S. petrodollar? As there's a lot of countries not trading in petrodollar. And when I saw that the Saudi Arabia agreed with Pakistan for a nuclear security treaty, I went, things are changing around the world.
So a lot to unpack there.
Sorry.
So first of all, I would say that actually Trump, I don't think, is fully aware of the successful execution of his Make America Great Again, America First policy is the end of the petrodollar, because you can't do it under a petrodollar state.
Right.
The reason U.S. manufacturing and its military-industrial complex were hollowed out is because post-Nixon removing the dollar from the gold standard, U.S. Treasuries then became the neutral reserve asset for the settlement of imbalances in international trade, and therefore the U.S. had to run a deficit because there was a demand for those treasuries. But the real challenge with the war in Ukraine, to circle back to how we started, is nobody can now credibly argue that U.S. Treasuries or European debt are neutral anymore, because we've just proven that when push comes to shove, they can be frozen and potentially seized.
Yep.
And gold is nobody's credit. And if you are in physical possession of your gold in Moscow, that's where maybe you now going forward want to put your excess reserves that have been accrued because you're a net exporting country. And we believe World War III kicked off, which we talk about in this presentation this morning, in 2018, I believe it was, when Russia dumped its treasuries and started buying gold.
Yep.
It was a very dangerous precedent for the US dollar, Western-backed financial system. And that came shortly after China opened up the gold window to international involvement. So Russia could, exchange its excess currencies that it got from selling oil to China in exchange for gold, and so on. And the Saudis have an awful lot of gold as well. And so what we're seeing in that chart, when you see the gold as a percent of global reserves growing, that's a combination of central bank buying, but also the appreciation of gold, because in order for gold to effectively play the role of neutral reserve asset for the settlement of imbalances in international trade, the total market cap of gold needs to be higher. And we believe that if you look at the price of gold from where Russia started dumping its treasuries, you see it begins to ramp. And then in December 2023, when we believe it became clear that Ukraine would lose the war against Russia, said more precisely that the world would perceive that NATO had lost the war against Russia, you begin to see the next wave up in the price of gold, because it is very clear that we're heading into a bifurcated system where the allies, some would say vassals of the US, of course, still have US treasuries as a key part of their reserve. But countries like Brazil and India and China and Russia have a whole different payment rail system they're setting up, whole different settlement system they're setting up. And as we said again in this presentation, all shortages create gluts. sanctions and tariffs and seizing of the Russian assets, freezing of the Russian assets, create an artificial shortage in payment rails and neutral reserve assets. And Talib's law, as we wrote in a piece, several weeks ago, all shortages lead to gluts. There will be a glut of payment rails. Alipay, WeChat Pay, the Brazilians have an option. All of these things are outside the eye of Torin, as Ben Hunt would describe the U.S. Department of the Treasury's desire to see every transaction, and are immune to sanctions. And so we're going to see the great bifurcation. Last thing I would say is one of the things that we find interesting to note, let's just look at the trade war. With a few exceptions that we could talk about, by and large, Trump's strategy has worked well with countries that currently host a U.S. military base. Korea, Japan, Europe. And it hasn't worked well where the U.S. does not have a very large military presence, India, China, etc., because the U.S. has escalation dominance in a tariff negotiation with countries where there's a giant U.S. military base within their borders. The two exceptions, well, the one exception is Canada, which is very interesting. And then, of course, Mexico being on the U.S. border has not yet signed a tariff agreement with the U.S. as well. And we find it very interesting that we have a classic color revolution style protest movement beginning to grow in Mexico, which we don't think is a coincidence. So anyway, that's the sort of the conspiratorial tin hat view of the world. By the way, the phrase conspiracy theorist is slowly undergoing a semantic shift from nut job to accurate predictor, as all these things that we were told were conspiracies turn out to be true. But I digress.
Hey, which intelligence agency in the world is most famous for fomenting color revolutions?
That would be the U.S. Yeah, that would be the U.S. Of course, through its proxies. As we say in this presentation, Mike Pence on Twitter. Don't know him. Very interesting guy. He's got 1 million followers, and he chronicles a lot of very interesting things about the activities of U.S.-funded non-government organizations, which is kind of an oxymoron again, because if all of your funding comes from the government, are you really a non-government organization? And Pence's theory is that the U.S. AID and other related NGOs did the dirty work that the State Department or the CIA didn't want to do. And honestly, it's hard to argue with him when you watch his 3-hour-long, webcasts.
Yes, I think. Well, anyway, I shouldn't comment any further. Probably get us kicked off of YouTube.
Yes. This is from Rodney. We love Rodney. Does Doomberg have any worries regarding the Bank of International Settlements? Is this something like Harry Potter? I saw a person named Catherine Fitz explaining to Tucker Carlson some of her concerns.
Yeah, I watched that interview as well. So it's a great question, Rodney. Can't say that I fully understand the inner workings of the central bank of the central bankers. I do know that thermodynamics is a good guide, and the U.S. is coming up on 39 trillion in debt, and Britain and France are on the cusp of financial crises, and Germany is going on a debt-driven spending binge as well, and that which can't go on forever usually doesn't. And so I do feel like we're on the cusp of a sort of a reset. I know that's become a bit corny, but the particulars, that's like asking me about whether, complex mortgage derivatives at a Midwestern bank in the U.S. should give me concern. Those are the specifics of how the crisis unfolded, but it always had to be, for example, that the U.S. housing system, which was debt-driven and speculative and all that stuff, would reach its Minsky moment and collapse. And one wonders whether the entire Western financial system has reached its Minsky moment, is on the verge of a necessary reset. And so when that was my takeaway from watching that interview a couple of months ago, was that yes, there's some mechanical things and some, who knew that this entity had that much power and so on and so on. There's no amount of power that the BIS could have over the Western economies that are going to save it from the current spiral that we're on in our view. And so it kind of struck us as like similar to trying to do a detective work about how the global financial crisis happened in 07 and 08.
Got a question for you here on the next segment with Secretary Chris Wright. I'm filling out the form to get the interview with Secretary Chris Wright, David Blackmon, myself, and Jay Yu, the founder of Nano Nuclear. Jay has said he's going to be rolling in on that one. But let's take a look here at this Brett Bear from Fox interview. He has a question from somebody else. I don't know who this person is.
Algorithms in the world in the not too distant future is in the range of 1 gigawatt to 5 gigawatts. 1 gigawatt is about one Hoover dam worth of electricity. So imagine 5 Hoover dams being used to just power one data center full of one company's AI. That's a future that we're headed towards quite quickly.
So how do we get that and still prevent people's electricity costs and energy costs from going up?
No, great question, Brett. So that is going to take a lot of changes. We've seen surging American oil production, surging American natural gas production over the last 10 years, but not electricity production. Just a different regulatory bureaucracy that has smothered growth in electricity. And of course, Biden-era policies that wanted to subtract. They wanted to close power plants much more than they wanted to build power plants. Of course, we've reversed that. We've stopped closing coal power plants. We've made it easy and quick to power new power plants. We're going to enable existing power plants to up their output. We're going to take backup generators that are already at data centers or behind the back of a Walmart and bring those on when we need extra electricity production. We're going to do a lot of creative things with transmission lines. So we will find tens of gigawatts of new transmission capacity on our existing grid. And to your point about costs, if you look carefully at the data over the last 5 years, the states that have had the fastest growth in electricity demand, like North Dakota leads the list at over 30% growth in electricity demand, their rates have gone down. Texas and Nebraska, rapid growth in electricity demand, very modest price increases. On the other hand, California, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, they've seen declines in their demand for electricity over the last 5 years and huge price increases.
There's a lot more, Doomberg, to that article, but there was a couple points that I wanted to ask in there about your thoughts on that. I love the way Secretary Chris Wright said basically that we're going to see costs coming down, but where they're going to come down first is where there's pipelines. Oh, nice. I thought that was a pretty cool way. But if you understand how the grid works, his comment saying that they're going to try to find tens of gigawatts behind a Walmart generator and bring it onto the grid, that's a heck of a technology, powering up a standalone backup generator behind a data center or a Walmart. That's a whole new technology and distributed management for your grid.
Yeah, I kind of heard it. First, I've heard it, so I'm just giving you my raw impressions.
Sure.
I took those two statements, the Walmart generator and the tens of gigawatts of transmission, to be separate.
Yeah, me too.
And I think that what he meant when he was talking about the Walmart generators is that they might be harnessed to serve backup power beyond just the Walmart in exchange for.
Exactly.
But the tens of gigawatts of new transmission, I don't know where those are coming from. But at the same time, our view, as we've written in a piece called Irreconcilable Differences, the marginal AI demand for electricity is probably not going to come from grid-connected power, but from isolated power dedicated to the data centers. And maybe a hybrid approach where there is connectivity for backup both ways. And we're seeing that. Dedicated nuclear, dedicated gas turbine for data centers. And I think the rest of what he said is absolutely correct, that the Biden administration was trying to shut down coal power plants and that the Trump administration has tried to reverse that. And at least we have a Secretary of Energy who comes from the energy sector, who understands nuclear power, sat on the board of a nuclear powered startup, created multiple unicorns in the shale space. And so I wouldn't critique him too much on the diesel generator comment, which I took to be slightly different. But at the same time, it is going to be challenging to get the transmission and other grid infrastructure needed to incorporate this incremental demand for AI, which is why we believe it has to go off grid. And in our view, the ultimate solution is natural gas goes into a building and data comes out of it. And everything that happens between methane and compute happens in that same building, because data is infinitely easier to send around the world than electricity or natural gas.
Wow. That's a
Yeah.
whole paradigm shift on the grid.
Yeah. So again, irreconcilable differences. You cannot power data centers and have residential and traditional industrial companies not see the pain of it on the same grid. And since the second part of that axiom is unacceptable, it won't happen. Now, it might happen a bit before people reverse course, but the long-term steady state assumption in our view has to be that data center operator A buys its own gas turbine, works with, Texas Regulatory Commission, gets free natural gas in West Texas, and computes to its heart content, training large language models and so on. Small commercial for our upcoming Doom Zoom for December. It looks like we're probably going to do a full deep dive on artificial intelligence for the layperson, because we have some involvement in our private investing in that space.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. Ultimately, the data centers are going to have to have their own behind the meter power generation. But right now, of course, they are putting some strain on some grids in the country right now because they're building the data centers without
that
the power
and
in place.
Conveniently, those parts of the country also happen to have installed intermittency that is now swamping out dispatchability, and so they make a very good scapegoat as well. So all these things are political.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Which tends to get lost in a lot of the conversations.
Well, nuance is not the mother's milk of politics, as we know.
No.
So as the Democrats start trying to pull together, and they say that affordability, and they're trying to blame President Trump for the electricity price increases, when you've seen some of the price increases back, Bloomberg just put out 3 weeks ago, there was 230, some areas back east, 230% increase in electricity because they were next to government data centers. You have 100% increase in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They're within 70 miles of data centers. But wherever you look, where there's pipelines, you have the Texas Gulf Coast area and other areas where pipelines are billions of dollars are rolling in to put in more natural gas. I think you'll see some stabilization in there.
Yeah, again, blame storming is a skill of modern politics, which is where you
blame storming. Did you say blame storming, sir?
Yeah, so that's when you gather a team and you figure out whose fault it is, right?
Anybody but yours, right?
Well, again, the effective articulation of a good brainstorming strategy doesn't necessarily involve truth.
Yeah.
It just involves a plausible narrative that is accepted by a large number of people. And by the way, to Rodney's point, we've written a few articles in this regard. One of them is that you can expect data centers to go up wherever you find a net LNG exporter.
Right.
So you just go to
the Permian Basin.
Oh no, LNG exporter like Malaysia.
Oh yes,
Trinidad
LNG
and Tobago,
for sure. Yeah.
like Qatar. Because why would you pay to freeze it and ship it and then regasify it when you just intercept it before all of that and power your computer with it? And so all you have to do to see where AI investments are going to go is go to the Statistical Review of World Energy, download their free and brilliant and utterly useful spreadsheet, and then go to the tab that says largest LNG exporters, and then take all of those countries and search that country name and AI, and you will see, wow, look at that. Oracle just put a $5 billion AI data center into Malaysia. Well, I happen to know Malaysia is a energy superpower that punches above its weight because I did business in Malaysia when I was in industry, and they have dirt cheap natural gas and dirt cheap oil, and they're right there, in the South China Sea, and
lots of dark fleet tankers doing shifting of oil in.
Sure. Again, the world of energy is going to persist beyond any sanctions that Callis or Ursula von der Leyen cocks up 19th sanctions package. I'm sure the people in Kuala Lumpur are just shaking in their boots over the 20th sanctions package. But I digress. And so you can see that natural gas is the bridging fuel of the future. Wrote a piece called Bridge Burning that made this argument. And if you're an LNG exporter, you're paying, soup to nuts, $6-7 a million BTU to go from your pipeline to the power station of your customer. Freeze it, ship it, regasify it, midstreams on both sides. Everybody cuts their vig. Well, why wouldn't you just build your data center right at Qatar, which gets natural gas for free?
Wow.
And so that's what we're seeing. It's quite predictable. By the way, our latest missive making fun of the whole concept of cheap oil. We talked about how there's still 4 million barrels a day of oil being burned to produce electricity. Half of it's in the Middle East that is gas rich and has always viewed gas as a nuisance. All they have to do in Saudi Arabia is build some gas power plants, and they'll have an extra 1 million barrels a day of oil to export.
We're about running out of time here, Almighty Doomberg, but got a question for you. With the death of the petrodollar that we covered on today's topic, do you think the world is shifting because the countersink to that is the $1 trillion investment that Saudi Arabia is making back into the United States and reshoring it? So that is how we are going to get away and back into that, if that makes sense?
Sure. Once we get past the friction of the transition of the reset, wildly bullish U.S. But to get there, you need a weaker dollar, you need higher gold. There is a tsunami of cash coming into the country, guys. And people who don't like Trump always underestimate everything he does. We are seeing it in the private markets. Like, there is a huge amount of cash. Japan, South Korea, Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, you name it. There's money looking for deals. And that is not a donation. They're investing capital, equity, debt into large-scale projects to remediate current U.S. industrial risk to China, which is massive. And I can tell you that the current administration is taking a whole of government, utterly sincere approach to this problem. We had an industrial contact who had a meeting with DARPA. DARPA is, for those that don't know, the Department of Defense's most advanced research skunkworks project. A lot of secret, a lot of black box projects. Some would argue that all of the major tech companies we now know and think are really valuable $1 trillion companies came out of DARPA. And they just, put some marketing on top of it. The origin story, out of my garage, yada, yada, yada. And we note with interest the most recent Genesis project. I'm not sure if you guys have seen that.
Oh, yes.
But the moonshot attempt to get, sort of true intelligent, artificial intelligence. That sounds like a smokescreen to roll out some technologies that have already been developed within DARPA, if we're being honest. And so I wouldn't underestimate the U.S.'s ability on that front. But as we've said, a couple of pieces we wrote about how Japan was, going to help rebuild the U.S. nuclear industry, and then we wrote a piece about how Korea was going to help rebuild the U.S. shipbuilding industry. Trump's going to build a Navy, and Korea's going to pay for it, right? And so this is reminiscent of when Trump first came down, the escalator and said, I'm going to build a wall, and Mexico's going to pay for it. And this was like so absurd to people that they couldn't believe it. But Trump has a way of saying things that are utterly absurd that then eventually have the sort of ring of truth to them. And we believe that the tsunami of cash, hundreds of billions, trillions of cash is pouring into the U.S. And as I try to tell our friends in private life, like, stick your hand out and grab some. It's coming, right? Position yourself accordingly. And so that's where we are.
We've got just a few more minutes here, but I want to give a shout out to James T. Kirk. He's now a new subscriber on my Substack. Oh, I got tickled at that. James Tiberius Kirk is now a new subscriber on my Substack. Right.
I got a Ron Burgundy the other day.
Did you really? How cool is that? Well, Almighty Doomberg, we've had your Doomberg.com on the scrolling by there, and you always, when we get this published out, you're on our top podcast listens. and you get thousands and thousands of listens on our podcast. And it's just, we so appreciate your energy, leadership. What are your last thoughts as we roll out of here?
Sure. Small pitch for our second project that we just launched in September called Classics Read Aloud. It's wildly different from Doomberg, as the name would imply. It's about resuscitating, curating, finding these brilliant pieces of literature from the past, the way people used to write and read. And it's done very well. It's one of the co-founders of Doomberg and its editor-in-chief
Nice.
has launched it as her passion project. It's done really well. So if you're interested in that, and we like to say the overlap in the Venn diagram of people that like Doomberg and like Classics Read Aloud is probably a very valuable list. But everything else is at Doomberg.com. Please go find that. And Stu, David, and to everybody who submitted comments, hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Always a pleasure to talk with you guys. Looking forward to the next time.
Hey, we look forward to it. And David, any last thoughts?
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. And to you, Doomberg, thanks for being here. Always appreciated. It's always brilliant, and really, really enjoy these talks.
Hey, thank you all. And for Stu Turley, President and CEO of the Sandstone Group, have an absolutely blessed Thanksgiving. We'll see you all soon.